Welcome to the Coastal Community Church Midweek podcast. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Shayla McCormick, and I will be your host. My husband TJ and I are the lead pastors of Coastal Community Church, a place where everyone's welcome because nobody's perfect and anything is possible. In this podcast, our goal is to bring the weekend message to life and to share stories that help you along in your faith journey. Let's get started. In this very first episode, Pastor TJ joins me to talk about why we decided to start this podcast. We're going to go behind the scenes as he talks about his creative process and coming up with series and what goes into writing a message. But make sure you listen until the very end, where Pastor TJ shares about his favorite thing about being a pastor. Let's jump into this brand new episode. Hey, TJ, welcome to Coastal's very first midweek podcast. Are you excited?
I'm pumped to be here.
Oh my gosh, I can't even tell. Jeez. Well, today I just wanted to share a little bit about why we're doing this podcast, why we made this decision, and just give people a little bit of insight into who we are. So I don't know if you want to share for a minute on the why.
Yeah, the reason why we're doing this podcast is Shayla thought we didn't have enough to do.
Oh my gosh.
So let's just add a few more things in the weekly routines.
Well, you're not busy enough. So
No. All pastors do is drink coffee and, read the Bible. That's our entirety of our job.
Seriously, I think so many people are listening to podcasts right now, and it's like something that you're able to find a little bit of a different insight or, expanded knowledge. And even so for you preparing messages and all of that kind of stuff, like there's so much content that you come away with.
Yeah, I have a lot of useless information that never makes it in. I wouldn't say it's useless, but I have a lot of information that doesn't make it into a message every week. And so it's an opportunity to share some of that.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to maybe convey some stories that we heard from people of situations or testimonies of how their lives have been changed because of a particular topic or circumstance.
Yeah, because I think
or even message that we shared at church over a weekend.
Yeah, there's so many people, there's so many stories that we hear of like people that have applied something in the message or have overcome in an incredible way, whether it's, addiction or marriage issues or, whatever it is, that have had a process where they've found freedom. And I think we hear so many of those stories and we thought, man, this would be a great platform to be able to interview people and to give them space to do that hopefully inspires, other people along the way. It always inspires me to hear those stories. So we figured, man, what a great way to be able to share that with everybody else.
Not only that, but it's an opportunity for maybe if you haven't taken the next step, you hear somebody's story that has and go, oh man, it's not as hard as I thought it was going to be.
Yes.
And so many people struggle with taking that first step, but if we can help you take your first step, then hopefully you'll be able to take the next step and the next step and the next step and eventually find the freedom or the life that you've been looking for.
And even as a church and, as the lead pastors of this church, one of the things that we always want to help people do is to make it easy to take that step and to find those tools and resources that allow them to do that. And so I think this is going to be a great space to do that, a great space to share kind of extra content information from the weekend and hear inspiring stories. So one of the things that I did want to ask you, a question that we get all of the time, actually a couple of questions that we get all the time, like how do you pick what series you're going to do at church? So how do you do that?
A lot of it kind of comes out of 21 days of prayer and fasting in January. That is a great time to really go, hey, God, what are you trying to do this year? What are you wanting to say to our church? What are some of the needs that we're seeing in culture, we're seeing in society that you really have answers to? And so, that'll drive, why we did a parenting series coming right out of the pandemic.
People loved that
where
series.
People were going, man, I've had my kids at home for the last however many months. What do I do as a parent? It's driven out of that. It's other things that you just see, like, man, there's a lack in this element of their spiritual lives that you're seeing across things. You're like, man, God really has something to say here.
Yeah.
We want to really help you understand this and apply this and to take your next step. And so I'm constantly looking at what's going on inside of our church.
Yeah.
I'm constantly looking at at what's going on around our world. And then what is God saying to me?
Yeah.
Like what is God working on in my life? Because if he's working on it in my life and it's becoming real and more relevant, then that's probably something. If he's changing me, he probably wants to change some other people. Because the one thing I've learned as a pastor is like, I'm not really going to preach on something I don't really get or I haven't really done. It's why you've never heard me do a series in the book of Revelation. I don't understand it. I don't comprehend it. And so I'm probably
People
not.
ask us all the time.
Yeah, I'm not going to teach out of it because I don't really feel like I have the authority to go there.
Yeah.
In that realm of something that God has not done something in my life there. And so I'm always looking at those things and going, okay, here's where we're going to go in these next couple of seasons as a church.
I think that's so good. So also, along with the series question, you have to write messages week in and week out. And I know for me, anytime you ask me to speak, I'm like, oh my gosh, how do you come up with all of this content and this information? And it's like so overwhelming. As a pastor, how do you do that on a weekly basis? What do you do to prepare messages? What does that process look like for you? That's a question that we get a lot of the time. Like, where do you come up with this stuff?
Yeah. I mean, in all honesty, there's a lot of different places. Number one, it starts with your own personal devotion to God.
Yeah.
The best messages I have come from.
You're so spiritual.
No, I'm not actually. I'm probably one of the least spiritual people you know.
I'll attest to that. No.
I would say you're way more spiritual than I am.
Oh,
you're way more committed
I'll agree with that.
disciplines than I am. It's an unfortunate thing
you're
too.
Having me speak.
Yeah,
more,
that's
right?
why I have you speak more. But it starts there. What is God saying to me, and what is God doing in my life? And I'm reading things for myself, but in that I find a lot of like, here's little outlines, here's little things.
Like from your daily devotionals.
From my daily devotionals that I'm doing.
Is there some sort of devotional, or do you have a process of that at all? Like your daily routine that some of that comes out of? And then
Yeah, I mean, my process is I use YouVersion.
Yes. If you haven't downloaded YouVersion, man, that's such a phenomenal way to take a practical step in your faith and to start doing devotionals. So you do?
Yeah, I use YouVersion. I have a yearly reading plan that I do. And then I'm always doing 1 or 2 or 3 of the devotionals that they provide in there that are on a specific subject or arena of life. And so, when we were in our marriage series, I was actually doing marriage devotionals during that time.
Smart.
And I'm gleaning things from what other people have done while also learning for myself.
Yeah.
And so
there's nothing really new under the sun.
No,
it's
not at
like
all.
It's all original content. Like, somebody's had that thought or idea somewhere.
Correct.
So
and
you're just learning from
I'm learning
so many
from
different
other
people's
places. And
revelations.
then a friend of mine might say, hey, I did this series on this. It's the best series our church ever did. I'd be like, hey, send that over to me. I'd love to hear it. I'll take it and I'll make it better.
Yes.
This is going to sound terrible, but God, I believe you have eyes, plagiarize. Is that terrible for a pastor to admit? But the goal of everything is how do we take this and make it applicable to our context, our culture, our people? And
I think people won't know this about you, but you're constantly reading. I'm like, where is TJ? He is in the bathroom, on the toilet, reading something.
Yeah, because it's the one place nobody bothers you.
Well, sometimes I'm like, hey, what are you doing?
I read anywhere from 2 to 4 hours a day, because in order to produce content, you got to consume content,
and you have a lot of content in that brain.
Yeah.
Sometimes sometimes this is such a random thought, but sometimes I don't even know. Guys have so much useless information about, like, you can remember this sports play like 20 years ago in this one game, and here was the score. It's just crazy to me. And I don't have that ability.
No, but women have the ability to remember every single detail of their day, where a guy's like, it was a day.
True.
So it's just different ways of consuming content.
So you bring it out of your daily devotionals every single day. You're gleaning from other pastors and leaders that, have been there or done a great series for their church, gleaning that information from them. And then just constantly consuming content by reading. And, I think some people
I'm always looking for an illustration.
Yes.
So I'm always
Illustrations are a big deal.
I'm always looking for some crazy moment or some awkward moment or something that's random that happens in the day. And, I don't look at those things as random things that happen in the day. I look at those as these are God opportunities to be able to use. And so I'm constantly marking those things down in my life so that I don't forget them. I have so many notes on my phone. Like my most valuable asset is probably my cell phone note section, because it's just got so many random things in it that are helpful. In fact, I heard this story about Joel Houston, who is the worship leader of Hillsong United. And he lived in New York City, and he was getting mugged. And, the guy asked for all of his money. And then he said, man, give me your cell phone. And he was literally like, listen, I will go to the bank and give you every dollar out of the ATM. Wow. Please do not take my cell phone. It's got all these notes and songs that I've been writing on. Like, it is the most valuable commodity that I have in my life. And when I heard that story, I thought to myself, man, that's so true. All the notes, all the random sayings, all the one-liners, all of those things that I'm just constantly writing down. And I don't write them down on paper. I write them down in my note section of my phone. It's probably the most valuable.
Make sure you back up your cell phone every day so you can download those things if you ever get mugged in New York City.
Just in case.
For sure.
I don't think anybody's going to New York City right now, so it's okay.
Probably not. I think sometimes, what I hear people come out of service all the time, and they're like, it's almost like you knew, you were talking to me. Like, how did you know what was happening in my life?
Yeah.
I think that comes out of so many people are dealing with the same thing. They just don't realize other people are dealing with it. And I think as a pastor, you probably see that all the time through conversations and, just being around people.
Well, it's the human psychology of all of this, that for some reason we think I'm the only one.
Yeah.
But all of us in reality are facing the same fears, the same insecurities,
the
same inadequacies, the same desires for love.
Yeah. The enemy just has a great way of deceiving us to make us think you're all alone. You need to, keep this silent or not share it with anybody, or nobody will understand, or
whatever great thing God makes, the enemy will come and make a cheap counterfeit of it.
Yeah.
And it will get us to buy into the counterfeit and think that is satisfactory. And we'll be never understanding that there's this great thing that we could have, and wondering why why that counterfeit is leaving us empty.
Yeah. I think, you talked about using illustrations. You use stories a lot. You make fun of yourself. I'm
the easiest person to make fun of. So
people are always, I think when people are with us and something happens, they're like, oh my gosh, is that going to end up in a sermon? Because
probably, most likely if it was good, it's going to end up in a sermon.
I've been there a few times when I hear you telling a story. I'm like, that is so exaggerated, TJ. I did not do it like
Listen, I remember in my mind and what is reality. And I think this is true for all of us. What happened in reality and what happened in our mind are totally different things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that illusion.
Yeah.
You have a lot of illusions, I think.
I thought you were going to say a lot of delusions, but.
Well, that too. Well, is there any final thing that you want to share with us that you think people would like to hear, maybe about, your process, or just who you are as a pastor, or, any of those things? What's your favorite thing about being a pastor?
Wow. My favorite thing about being a pastor. I think my favorite thing about being a pastor is when you see somebody's life be radically transformed by the power of God.
Yeah.
And knowing that you got to play a small part in that process of changing their destiny forever. It's those moments that keep you going through the difficult moments, the demoralizing moments, the demeaning moments.
Yeah.
And that makes it all worth it at the end of the day. There's nothing better than at the end of service when you see somebody raise their hand and say, man, I want to surrender my will and my way to Jesus. And I want to follow him. And, we get to see that every single weekend. And we get to see that every single weekend because people are constantly inviting their friends and their families to a place that we believe that we have created where everyone's welcome because nobody's perfect and anything's possible. And that's a testament to the community that is at Coastal Community Church, that they're not just loving God themselves, but they're actually loving people. Yeah. They're loving not only the people that already know God, but they're loving the people that don't know God. And because of that love, they feel comfortable enough to follow them into an unfamiliar environment called church, where there's a lot of thought processes of like, this is what church is, this is how they're going to act, this is what they're going to think of me. And then when they get here and there are people that are excited to see them, that are outside, that are high-fiving them, they walk in, they can get a cup of coffee or a cappuccino at the coffee bar, and they can walk into service, and there's some really fantastic music that's going on that maybe they don't really even understand, but they're like, man, there's something like there's a weird feeling here. Yeah. That's the Holy Spirit. They just don't know it yet. Yeah. And then a really good looking bald guy gets up, and
my gosh, we have to bring that up every time.
Man, if I got the mic, I'm going to say what I want, you know? And so, talks in a pretty authentic and real way.
Yeah.
And they realize that guy doesn't have it all together. They don't have it all together, but there is somebody who wants to put it all together, and that's Jesus. And that's the amazing thing about our community here that we're a part of at Coastal.
I love that. And I don't think we always get to hear all of those stories. So maybe you're somebody that's listening and, man, God has impacted you or done something amazing in your life. We would love to be able to hear about that. So share those stories with us. You can email us at info@coastalcommunity.tv. Tell one of our volunteers. I think those things can be such an encouragement to other people. So thank you so much, TJ, for coming and hanging out on our very first ever Coastal Midweek podcast. It was awesome. Man, that was so much fun for me to get to sit down with TJ and get to share a part of him that maybe is so behind the scenes and that nobody really knows, what goes into those different types of processes. And what I thought was so key that shapes so much of his messages and series and all of those times are that personal time with God, that personal devotional time. And I think the same can be true of all of us. If we begin to develop those routines and those habits and that specific time with God, it begins to bleed over into every area of our life and our marriage and our parenting and relationships and our jobs. Just having that consistent time with God begins to bring life to all of those other areas, begins to speak into and shape all of those other areas of life. One of the things that I love that he began to talk about and that he was sharing is that whatever great thing God makes, the enemy will always make a cheap counterfeit. And man, that is so powerful when we begin to think about how many times we settle for a cheap counterfeit. How many times do we settle for something that's second best in our life? And recently, Pastor TJ actually did a message where he talked about that. And so we'll put a link to that in our show notes where you can go back and listen, where he unpacks that a little bit throughout his message. But we just want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's podcast, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss any content. We're going to be doing this every single week where we'll be sharing stories or we'll be interviewing Pastor TJ. Also, you know what? Take a screenshot of it and share it on social media and make sure you tag us at Coastal Church. We will see you guys back here next week. Hope you have an incredible week.